This is the Course of Action podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Clark. My debut book, Hear These Truths, the ultimate guide to building your leadership algorithm, is available now wherever books are sold. Check it out on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and for signed copies, go to jeffclarkofficial.com and get in touch. Don't forget to follow on social media, leave a 5-star review for the book, and hit that subscribe button for the latest episode notifications. And as always, enjoy the episode. All right, everyone, welcome to the Course of Action podcast. My guest today is none other than the Drive On podcast host and the author of Surviving Son, Scott Deluzio. What's going on, Scott?
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeff. I really appreciate this opportunity to come on your show and sort of flip things. I had you on my show a little while ago, and now getting on your show and flip things around a little bit. So I'm looking forward to it.
Very awesome. And I've been following Drive On podcast for a while now, and it's cool to kind of flip the tables on people. I recently did an episode with Eric Bishop, another author, where he came on here and flipped it on me and asked me questions. So It's kind of cool to shake things up a little bit and do things differently. So Army veteran, you were in the infantry. How long were you in the Army?
About 6 years. Yeah. So
okay.
I joined in 2005 and got out in 2011. So,
okay. What'd you do after you got out?
So I got out and really had some trouble trying to figure out who I was going to be after leaving the military. Cause I was National Guard. So I did have a civilian job while I was in the military, which made that transition a little bit easier. However, as I got back from my deployment to Afghanistan, I found it more and more difficult for me to just do the job that I was doing before. It just seemed like it was meaningless. And I was struggling to get up in the morning to even go to work because it was like, this job is a drag. I didn't want to do it. I didn't feel like I related with my coworkers anymore. And so to me, it took a while to try to figure out where I fit into this world after getting out of the military. So eventually what I ended up doing is starting a couple of businesses. I dabbled in a few different things here and there, but ultimately I landed in software development, which is what I do now. And we make software for e-commerce sites and things like that. So that's really what I ended up falling into. Not what I went to school for at all. I have an accounting degree from college, and so it has absolutely nothing to do with what I did. But I ended up teaching myself all of the software development stuff that I needed to know, and I enjoy what I do. It's pretty fun, and I really am glad that I found myself in this position.
So, in military transition is a big deal. We talked about it on Drive On podcast, and I know you talk about it a lot with a lot of people because it's a big topic.
Yeah.
Probably you can't talk about it enough, and the struggles and the battles and just different things. But what was kind of like? Because I know you got out. What came first, the book or the podcast?
So it's kind of tricky. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg kind of thing, because when I first got out or got back from Afghanistan, I should say, I started just jotting down notes of things that happened, places I went to, thoughts that I had at the time and stuff, because I knew that our minds play tricks on us as we get older. We start to either forget things or just not remember them the way they actually happened. Mm-hmm. And I knew as I got older, my kids would start to have questions about, what happened when you were in the war and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to forget things. So I just started writing things down, not with any intention of writing a book. It was really just writing down notes so that when I became an old fart like I am now, I would have, a better source of information to fall back on. And then fast forward a few years, this is now about 3 years ago, I started my podcast, and around the same time, I decided that the notes that were just collecting dust were more of a story than I initially gave it credit for being. And so I started to take those notes and put them into a book format. Um, I worked with various people throughout the whole process to help me get it to where it is today. Um, and yeah, it really was um, right around that same time that I started the podcast that I had this idea for getting the book started. The podcast really was born out of um, the fact that I knew several people who I served with who came home from overseas and took their own lives, and
Mm.
to me that was such a hard thing to understand and wrap my head around. Like, we had just gotten out of this place in Afghanistan where people literally wanted to kill us, and we all made it out alive.
Hmm.
And then we came home where people want nothing but the best for us, and now we're starting to lose guys. That just didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And I was dealing with my own mental health struggles as well. I wasn't, as bad off as some of those guys were, but um, I I realized that it was a widespread problem throughout the military. And so that's where the podcast got started. Was I wanted to get more information out there to people, sharing stories, like other inspirational stories that other veterans might have to share, but also sharing resources of other things that people could do to get the get the help that they need.
Right.
And we all know about the VA and
Hmm.
all the services that they have to offer. Not knocking the VA at all; they do a lot of great things. However, they don't do everything, and there
Yeah.
are certain things that
Yeah.
maybe the VA doesn't offer that would work well with certain people. And so I try to expose all of the different nonprofits and other organizations that are doing great things for veterans, and
Hmm.
get that information out there to help as many people as possible.
Yeah.
The goal was to start. I was starting off with, let's just help one person. If I can help one person, then I'm hitting my goal. But now it's like, let's help as many people as possible. And
Right.
and that's partially where the book came from too. Is I the struggles that I went through, the stuff that I experienced throughout my time in the military, my deployment, and the time coming back home. uh, I dealt with things in a pretty unhealthy way. I was really a jerk to uh, my family, to the people around me and everything. I was angry all the time. I was just not taking care of myself and everything. And there's way better ways to deal with things than what I did. And so it's
Yeah.
like, kind of like, learn from my mistakes. I did this. I screwed up. You shouldn't have to do that too. Like,
Hmm.
take a look at what I did and what I eventually did to eventually get back on track, or at least closer to on track to where I was before. But I don't think I'll ever 100% be the same person that I was before, but I can work on getting closer to that, over time. So
Yeah. So, um, now, Surviving Son is a very personal book. It's very, very personal. You lost your brother. Unfortunately, that's a big topic of the book and kind of how you coped with it. You said yourself, a lot of unhealthy ways that you came home, and I think it's important, like you said, to the VA doesn't do everything, and they are a government ran institution, and we know the inefficiencies of government. I've had some good experiences with the VA, and I've had some friends that have had some horrible experiences with the exact same office.
right,
It is what it is, but there's a lot of things that we can do as veterans to, put things out there. There are other ways of doing things. I know a bunch of guys who take veterans hunting all the time, take them
yeah,
camping, get them outdoors, get them, out around the fire and talking and just talking. I mean, 'cause that's the biggest thing. But everybody's got to feel comfortable where they're at and kind of in their own skin to start talking and peel back the layers of the onion. And the next thing you know, you don't realize how much, talking helped, and that's part of
right,
it. I think a lot of people are afraid of mental health because they're afraid that they're going to expose themselves too much, or they're afraid they're just going to get some pills thrown at them to calm them down. And we don't realize how much talking is so important to the cause. And in your case, you wrote a book about it, you did a podcast, and um, definitely want to talk about, when did you decide to write the book?
yeah. So it was right around that time that I started the podcast that I decided to write it as a book. um, and really, it was my way of not only giving back to the other people who are out there who might be struggling and trying to help them, but it was also my way of uh, uh, trying to let my brother's legacy continue on. You know, you mentioned I lost him. He was killed in Afghanistan. We were both in Afghanistan at the same time. He was killed in action, tragically, and uh, I realized that he's not around to tell his story anymore. And I had this ability now to write this story and let his story continue on well past his life and my life even.
Hmm.
This is a book now that will live on for years and years and years, and,
Oh
and
yeah.
hopefully live all of us. But the the day that I had the idea, the light bulb moment that came on, that was like, this needs to be a bigger story, was so my family and I were invited to the White House by President Trump. There was a Gold Star family reception that they had, where it was a ceremony, like a memorial type thing, where they honored 50 families who are Gold Star families who had lost a loved one in the military. And uh, apparently President Trump had done this every year while he was in office. And I think the last year he was in office, I think that was there's a little bit of controversy over that, because there was something with the Gold Star families and COVID, or something like that. I don't know the exact details, but
Hmm.
we were before all of that. So, but while my parents and I were in Washington, we're sitting down to just have a drink after we went to the White House, and I was like, I had this light bulb moment where I was like, this is bigger. If this is something that like getting invited to the White House is not an everyday occurrence for most
Oh
normal
yeah.
average people, right?
You're right.
And so to me, I was like, okay, so this is bigger than what I've made it out to be in my own head. Like, this is a pretty big deal, and so maybe this needs to be a story that gets told through writing, and write a book. And so that's really where that moment was, where I decided, this should be a book.
So what was the process of putting it together? Like having to relive a lot of those moments, and how did you cope with kind of the kind of some of the old emotions and some of the old habits? Did anything sneak back? Like, what was the process? How did you kind of deal with putting it together? Because that's I interviewed Michelle Black a while back about
Mhm.
she's a Gold Star spouse and ODA 3212, and I was like, what was it like writing that and telling that story and reliving it?
Yeah.
And her answer was really, really cool, and I'm interested to hear yours. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I had her on my podcast too a little while back, and she's a great person. Her
Yeah,
book is
awesome.
incredible, and the story surrounding her husband's death and everything is pretty incredible as well.
Hmm.
So, but for me, the process was, first off, I dusted off the notes that I had took out and had written all those years ago, and I reread through everything that I had put down, and I started piecing together, okay, how do I want this to flow? Do I want to start off, and I went through several revisions on this book. It never, it's nothing like what it started off as.
Right. Yeah.
Like what sequence of events do I want to start with? Do I want to start at the end, or do I want to start at the way back in the beginning? How do I want to formulate this book, and where's the storyline going and everything? So I took some time to think about what the best flow of the book would be, and reading through everything, yeah, it definitely brought up some emotions. I had some things that I just sort of tucked back in the back of my memory that I tried to just not think about too much. And when I was reading through my notes, I started saying to myself, "Oh yeah, that's right. This did happen. That is what was going on," and I had completely forgotten about it. Not that I forgot totally about it, but it was just I wasn't thinking about it anymore. It was just one of
Hmm.
those things that I didn't want to think about anymore, and so I just tucked it in the back of my mind, shoved that down, and didn't really give it too much attention.
Hmm.
But then one part of the book that I do write about is I go into detail about the mission that my brother was on, and how that that day took place when he was killed. And I compiled all of that information from these incident reports, these sworn statements that the guys who were on the ground during that mission that they had written up. And I think there was about 20 or 25 different individual accounts of what had taken place that day.
Wow.
And so for the first time, this was probably around this time last year, uh, I I sat down and I actually read all of those incident reports and went through exactly what happened. And what was really interesting to me, first off, it was difficult for me to read because it's like
Yeah.
I'm reliving
Reliving it all
this
again. Yeah.
terrible moment,
Hmm.
which I wasn't technically there at, at that time when he was killed, but I was reliving like what had happened over and over and over
Yeah.
about
That
25
that
times.
day, that moment
Yeah,
where you found out and it all comes
it,
rushing to you.
it did. Yeah. So that was difficult in and of itself. But the interesting thing to me was uh, how everyone who was there, they all witnessed the same exact events. Everyone was there at the same time. They all were part of the same mission, but how varied the perspectives were. Some of the timelines seemed just slightly off, and some of the uh, events that took place, it didn't exactly seem to line up. But everyone's perspective is just slightly different. So I had to sort of interpret what I was reading through all of that and line everything out in sort of a timeline format and say, okay, this is what seems to make the most sense in terms of what had happened that day. And so it was really interesting. But I do go, there's a section in the book there where I basically outline everything that took place during that firefight, during that last mission that he was on, that talks about all of the stuff from those sworn statements. And so that was a difficult thing to experience because for at that point it had been about 11 years. Uh, I had not read any of that
Mm,
prior to writing this book. And so I finally sat down and I started reading it. My mom luckily still had a copy of the sworn statements, and so she gave them to me, and I sat down and started reading through them all. And of course they're all somewhat redacted too, so that made it that much more difficult to read through things because the names are taken out and things like that are removed from it all when we got it. So it was slightly more difficult to put together than if I had the actual original copies.
right.
But I think I managed to get a pretty accurate version of what had taken place. Plus compiling it with some of the conversations I've had with some of the guys who were
Yeah.
there,
Fill in some of the gaps.
filling in some of the blank pieces
Yeah.
where things got redacted and who said what and who did what or whatever. So but yeah, I mean the whole process was um, it was difficult at times. I saved the part where he was killed to kind of the end of the writing process. I think it was just procrastination. I didn't want to relive
Sure.
that
Oh, yeah.
part of
It's a
it.
tough thing to live. It's a tough thing to think about and process, let alone put it into your own words,
Right. Right.
you know, because you're your biggest critic already, and
Sure.
that's just how it is. And then you're putting a moment that is a pivotal time in your life, you know, on paper, and you're talking about it. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine, man. I haven't been there, but I can't imagine the emotions that you went through
Right.
trying to live that moment and then document it essentially.
Yeah, and that's really what it was. It was documenting that moment in time. And yeah, you're right. It was difficult to do, but at the same time it was somewhat therapeutic too, because it
Hmm.
was like once when it's down on the page and it's on the screen as I'm typing it or whatever, it became like, okay, I can put this to bed now. I don't have to go back and dig this situation up anymore. Obviously we're talking about it now and it's fine. It's not like a big deal for me to talk about it like this. But it was it was almost when you go to a funeral, it's like, okay, this is that final
Yeah.
goodbye, final moment. It was almost like I got to have that final moment, and I was able to just kind of put this to rest, and I didn't have to dig this back up again.
And I think for a lot of people, They need that. And it's
Mhm.
not so much as closing the door on it and hiding in the closet and saying, I'm never going to see this again, as much as it is that coming to grips moment of, and I've lost some, friends and I've even lost some troops to suicide, and it was just kind of that moment where you have to just kind of say, okay, it happened. It happened.
Mhm.
There's nothing I can do about it. I can remember the good times and I can process this and move on. And obviously a lot of people do motivational stuff with it. And you talk about it now, which I think is awesome. And you wrote a whole entire book about it, which has an amazing cover, by the way. I don't know who designed your cover, whose idea that was, but that is awesome. It is like spot on, perfect. I was like, somebody brilliant did this.
Well, I won't say brilliant, but the idea actually came from I was just googling some ideas for the book cover, and I came across an image of uh, another soldier who was standing in a very similar pose to that, holding the flag. You can see the cover of the book in the background behind you and behind me, but. Um, it was a very similar pose to that, and I was like, "That is just such a powerful
Yeah, it is.
pose there." And so I had a good family friend of ours. She's a photographer, and I asked, is this something that you think you could recreate with me? And I was actually holding the flag that was on my brother's coffin as well, so that was even more symbolic and
Mhm.
meaningful. Was that I was actually using that same flag, and the hardest part about that whole picture was squeezing back into my uniform.
Hey, if I had to do it today, I'd just go buy a bigger one because
Yeah.
there's no way I'd be able to do it.
I was afraid like the button was gonna snap and go, shoot off and kill someone or
Right? Like,
whatever.
hey, let's make sure we go from like chest up.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you don't see the rest of me in that picture. It's you know
It's a great photo. It's a great cover. It's very, very powerful. And it's just, man, when you sent it to me, and I was like, whoa, whoa. Like I'd seen the cover before because I'd
Sure.
seen you on Instagram and all that. But when I got it in my hands and I was looking at it, I was like, that's a cover. That is a home run type of cover. And it's awesome, man. So, but what's it? We often talk about gold star spouses and gold star families.
Mhm.
There's gold star brothers and sisters out there. What has the reception been like? I don't want to say you kind of self-labeled yourself a gold star brother, but you know, surviving son. That's a very bold statement. What has the reception been like? And you've gone to gold star events and kind of talking about that from your perspective of, surviving son.
Yeah, so for me, I feel like the siblings, the Gold Star brothers and sisters, almost aren't recognized as much as the parents, who certainly should be recognized,
Sure.
and the spouses.
Hmm.
And I would even say maybe even the children, the Gold Star like children
Yeah.
of
Yep.
fallen service members, also probably fall into the same category as siblings as well, where they're not quite as well recognized, maybe as the spouses and the parents. Um, I don't know why that is, but it's something that I've noticed over time. Where
Yeah.
I've spoken to other Gold Star siblings, and uh, it's almost like we're put on the back burner. Almost as if we weren't really a part of the family or really like that close. But it's like this is the kid I grew up with. Like we horsed around in the backyard together. We were friends. We were roommates after we both moved out of my parents' house, and like we shared a lot of uh, time and experiences and things like that together. So yeah, I mean, we were really close, and we are just as much a part of this Gold Star
Hmm.
family as anyone else would be. Um, but that's sort of just I don't know. Maybe that's just my own perception of what
No, I think
has taken
you're
place.
absolutely right. And I asked the question simply because, I don't think we you hear about gold star families and gold star spouses, and every now and then I hear gold star children. You never hear anything about gold star brother or sister, and they're out there. I know they are. You're obviously
Right.
proof of it. Um, but it's eh, I think there's a dynamic there that we're kind of forgetting to talk about, and that's the simple fact of you're the surviving son.
Hmm.
What was it like? you know, looking at your parents, and being the one, who survived, what was that like? What was the dynamic with your parents like, having to kind of cope with one less child in the house now and that you're here?
For me, when my brother was first killed, my immediate thought was, okay, I need to help out my parents in any way I could. Of course, I was in Afghanistan, so I there was not a whole lot that I
Yeah.
could do. I couldn't even call home
Oh,
when I first found out about my brother because my parents hadn't been notified yet. And so there's
right.
anyone who's been overseas, there's communications blackout whenever something like this takes place, and until the family is notified, there's no calling, there's no emails, there's
Yeah.
nothing like that. I was not allowed to call home. It actually wasn't until the next day when I was actually in Kuwait that I was able to call home. So that was a very lonely, probably 18 or so hours where
Oh,
I had nobody really to talk to, and that's when I finally was able to call home. Um, but yeah, I felt like I didn't want my parents to have to worry about things uh, that no parent should really have to worry about. I didn't, my brother had life insurance, and like there was a state, his estate that had to go through like the probate court and all that kind of
mhm.
stuff. And I'm like, no parent, I don't care who they are, no parent should ever have to worry about this kind of stuff. Like what
Agreed.
to do with his assets, like
Oh, yeah.
the the money in his bank account, the uh, the title to his car, to all this stuff that he had. Like, what parent would ever want to be worried about that stuff, especially right after losing their child? So I felt like I needed to do things for them like that. Um, and of course, my parents also were doing things for me at the same time because I was only able to do so much, but they were helping me, emotionally, and other things like that too. But um, they I just felt like I needed to be the strong one. I needed to be there to do the things that they shouldn't have to do, and that was my uh, sort of my purpose after getting home. Is I felt like I just needed to do all of those difficult things. I just gotten out of Afghanistan. I was in the okay, this sucks, but we'll get through it mode.
Yeah.
That's just what it was like on certain missions. You're out there and it's like, okay, this sucks. Um, I'm I'm dragging ass because it's hot and
Yep.
it's I'm carrying a heavy load and everything like that, but it sucks, but I'll get through it. And so I felt like, okay, this sucks in a different way. It wasn't like I was carrying a heavy physical load, but I was carrying a heavy emotional load.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I'll just suck it up. I'll deal with it and I'll get through this. And, just like any other mission that I might have been on, I just treated it that way.
So let's switch gears for just a second,
Mhm.
and let's talk about the podcast, Drive On Podcast. Um, what was it like starting that? Because I know for me, it was like, great idea. Sounds
Yeah.
fantastic. Bought all the equipment. I said, let's do this. And then I just kind of sat on it. I said, man, people are going to hate it. I'm going to suck,
Right.
live. People are going to hate my voice. Like I was going through my head of all the criticisms. Like people aren't going to like it. They're going to comment and say I'm dumb and like all this stuff. Like they're going to disagree with my opinions. And I was like, I messed with my head for a long time and then
Yeah.
put it off for, I think, close to a year. And then I finally jumped in. But what was it like for you starting up the podcast with the specific mission and just saying, okay, I'm going to go in, especially after all this, and now you're going to jump online and talk to other people about some of the very same and similar issues?
Yeah. So I sort of treated it like another mission, another thing that I needed to do. I didn't know the first thing about podcasting. I had been a guest on other podcasts, so I had uh, spoken on a podcast before, but really, it's really was no different than like a Zoom call. I on the technology side, I didn't really need to do anything special. I just needed to show up and talk.
Right.
So, like that wasn't really any experience to how podcasts work and how do you get the podcast from the conversation that you and I are having now to publishing it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube or anywhere else that you might distribute your podcast. How do you do all of that stuff?
Right.
How do you uh, make it clean and polished? How do you make the audio sound good? How do you uh, uh, what do you do with the audio files? Recording an intro and all that kind of stuff. I had never done any of that kind of stuff
Yeah.
before, and so I was jumping into this, like just jumping into the deep end without having swimming lessons, and it was like I felt like I was barely treading water at first. But I reached out to a couple of friends who had podcasts, and I asked them, okay, what do I do? How do I do this? What do you guys do? And they talked to me about it, and they told me, where they host their podcast, and what kind of equipment I needed. And they just said, start off with basic equipment. You don't have to go in and buy the expensive Gucci stuff, because let's say you do it and you only do 10 episodes or so, and you decide this isn't for you. You don't want to blow all that money on something that you're not going to end up using long term.
Right.
Turns out I'm still using the same mic that I
Nice.
bought in the beginning. So, it still works. It's still functional. It still does the job. It sounds fine. I'm sure there's better mics out there, but for what I'm doing, I don't really care. Like this is,
Sounds good to me,
for
man.
what it is. Exactly. So, yeah, I kind of just jumped into it. At first, I think the first maybe half dozen or so episodes, I didn't really tell anyone about the podcast. It was just my wife and I who knew about it. And come to find out, that's not the best way to launch a podcast. You definitely want to be telling people about it. So the first
listeners.
Yeah, exactly. The first few episodes were very low on the listenership, but once I started getting more comfortable with the process, the first few episodes were just me talking about whatever I had on the top of my mind. Once I got more comfortable with doing that, I started telling people about it, and it got a great reception. And at first it was just family and friends and that kind of thing. But I think that's the way most podcasts start off, is like that, unless you have a built-in audience already,
Right.
which I didn't. But then I started reaching out to some of my friends, people that I served with, or other veterans that I knew, that I knew throughout my life. And I asked them to join me on the podcast. And at first I was like really timid about asking them, because I was like, who's going to want to be on this podcast? Like, what is this podcast even? Like, it doesn't hardly have anyone listening to it at this point. Who would actually want to do that? But it turns out every single person that I reached out to was like, yes, not just yes, but like, hell yeah, I will definitely do this. And they were like honored to do it. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm onto something here. And so, over time, it's evolved. My process has changed a little bit. I've streamlined a whole lot of things. I don't know if you want to get into the nitty gritty details of all this stuff, but I've made things so much more efficient on my end, so that way I'm able to crank out more episodes without putting in all this extra work. So, it just makes life so much easier.
What's maybe, for the sake of time, what's maybe the most efficient thing that you changed, or inefficient thing that you changed to make yourself more efficient? So if anybody's listening, they're thinking about, oh, why should I do a podcast? What do Jeff and Scott think who do they think they are? Joe Rogan or something? Like,
Right.
No, of course not. But, there are things to do. Like, I've learned a lot too about when to schedule time, when to automate certain things, when to sit down and dedicate time to editing and all that. What's been the biggest thing that you did that really just changed the game?
Yeah, for me, it was automation of certain things. So I use a service called Zapier, Zapier, and it allows me to link up my scheduling calendar to a bunch of different stuff. So as soon as someone schedules a time with me on my podcast to do an interview, it sends them an email right away with the link where we're going to do the meeting, information with what they can expect, stuff that I need from them, like a photo or whatever that I can use to promote the episode. It sends them all that stuff, so I don't have to send, even though I've done over 200 episodes, I haven't sent out 200 some odd emails, because I did it once and it just automatically sends that stuff out. It also creates a note in Evernote, which is where I kind of just jot down my questions and stuff like that, but it has all the guest information and all that stuff. So again, I don't have to create notes manually. It just automatically populates it with the stuff that I'm going to need to have in there. And then once when I'm done editing the episode, I schedule it out for whenever it's going to be released, and then I also use Zapier to automatically post my social media post afterwards as well. So I don't have to do any of that stuff. All I'm doing really is scheduling the episode, and it automatically will take it and post everything to all of my different social accounts. So it makes life so much easier for me just to automate all
Mm.
of that stuff, right? So
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check out Zapier. I use Calendly to schedule
yeah,
it and to get that first email out there and ask some questions. Because I found that, and I actually started doing that more after I got your invitation to come on to drive on. Because I was like, oh man, that is slick. And
yeah,
he's asking for so much stuff. I'm like scrolling down, going, geez, what is this? And then I was like, well, when I thought about it, I was like, it's actually really smart. This guy's obviously smarter than I am because I'm begging people for information, like, hey, send me a headshot. I'm stealing their stuff off of social media to try to figure it out. I was like,
right,
so that's what I had a Calendly account already, and then I just
yeah,
switched the name and started using it for that. And
yeah,
so thank you for the inspiration. But
yeah, absolutely.
it's just a better way of doing it. But mine doesn't do the social media. It links up my calendar, it schedules it, keeps my notes for
Yeah,
the
so I
questions and all that, but it doesn't do social media.
yeah, I use Calendly too, but Calendly links can link into Zapier, and then
What?
that's how that email got sent out. So as soon as you scheduled with me, it automatically created a room in Zoom. So it had a unique
Oh,
link for our meeting, and then it popped that into the email and sent you the email pretty much
okay.
instantaneously. So it all
I'm
happened like
I'm
probably
sold.
within a matter of seconds. So
I'm
um,
I'm gonna check it out. I'm sold
yeah,
because I do a little bit of that stuff myself, and of course graphics and things like that. And you still got to kind of do a little bit of that. I have templates now where I can kind of just pop a picture in there and then redo the name.
yep,
I took off some of the other details that way I don't have to. If somebody reschedules on me, I don't have to shift episodes around and then make changes on all the social media. It's almost kind of generic, just
right,
to keep it simple. So let's talk about the audiobook because you just
sure.
released the audiobook recently. And not only is the book already a very powerful and very emotional and very personal book, you did the audiobook and you read it yourself, didn't you?
I did. Yes, yeah.
What was what was the inspiration to do an audiobook?
Yeah, so after releasing the paperback version, and then the paperback and Kindle like ebook version came out at about the same time, and I think about a month later, the hard copy or the hardcover came out as well. So all within the same time period. Um, I was telling everybody I knew about the book, and there's some people who are like, "I'd love to read your story or get to know your story, but I don't have time to read. I like to listen to audiobooks. Do you have an audiobook?" And after the first person said, I was like, okay, well, whatever, that's not that big a deal. It's just the one person. But more and more people were saying that they preferred audiobooks uh, over the traditional like physical book or even an ebook that they would have to sit down and read.
Hmm.
That way they can listen to it in the car, they can listen to it while they're exercising, whatever. That's just how they consume the book. And so I said, okay, well, if that's what people are looking for, I might as well put it out there. It's not going to hurt anything to put it out there. So um, I decided I'm just going to open up my recording software that I have on my computer and uh, just start reading the book. And I already have the microphone set up and everything. I'm good to go there. Uh, and what I found is that I suck at reading. So I'm reading the book, and uh, I'm just sort of making assumptions about what the next words are going to be like on the next line. Like as I'm getting towards
Oh.
the end of one line, I'm making an assumption of what the next word is going to be. And my gosh, if I didn't do a good job editing, there would be so many curses in there. Like, oh, I'm such an idiot. Like I can't believe I'm screwing this whole thing up. So yeah, I went through. I did the whole reading of the book, and um, so Audible is the platform that I released it on, and it also distributes it out to iTunes and some other platform. I forget the other one now, but so it's available on Audible through Amazon and everything like that too. But they're really, really picky about the sound quality that you have. They don't like to have real high fluctuations in the sound levels where it's like real high volume and then real low, real soft, because from the listener's experience, they're going to have to constantly be adjusting their volume. And that's not a great experience. So,
Yeah.
so I found I use a program called Audacity to record it. They have some add-on tools that you can use to help kind of fix the levels of the volume and normalize everything and make it sound nice and consistent throughout. And they even have a thing that will do a check to make sure that it'll pass all of their checks as well.
Oh, really?
When you submit it. Yeah. So it really was pretty slick there to be able to record it all, make sure that it sounded right, and then submit it. So that way I didn't have to go back and do it 27 more times, just, trial by error or
Right.
whatever. So, and without that tool, I never would have gotten this book released, the audio version, because it was just such a valuable check. And it did so much of the heavy lifting for me that I didn't have to learn how to do all of that stuff myself. So this tool was really, really efficient and made life super simple to get this book released.
How long did it take you to just record?
So the audio book itself came out to be just a little over 5 hours. So of recording time, that actually made it into things into the book. It was about 5 hours, but it was way more than that because there was retakes and things like that. I started it, I believe, in November of 2021,
Okay.
and I finished it, I think, this past April.
Wow.
So couple months ago. And it wasn't like I was consistently doing it day
Mhm.
after day after day. It was, I'd record a little section here, then a little section there, and then I pieced everything together, which was made easier actually by the way you have to submit everything is by uploading like one chapter at a time. So
Oh,
I just kind of focused on let's start with chapter 1 and we'll do that, and then chapter 2, and I just focused on it that way, and it made life a little bit easier, so I didn't have to edit one huge audio file that
oh man.
contained the entire book, right? So so that was pretty good. And yeah, so I mean, it took a long time.
Yeah.
I don't even know how many hours I put into recording in total, but yeah, the book itself came out to be about 5 hours.
Can you believe there's actually people out there who do voiceover and read audiobooks for a living?
When
And
I first
I mean,
when I first started doing it, I was like, well, this could be something I could do. But then when I realized how crappy I was at reading my own book, I was like, there's no way I'm doing this
can't even
for
read my
anyone
own book,
else.
let alone
Yeah,
someone else's.
yeah.
So, there was ever a point in time where you were reading this over, trying to record it and going, God, I wish this chapter was shorter.
Yeah. There was definitely those times when I was like, my gosh, I dragged a little bit on here. But then I was also fortunate. It's not an incredibly long book. The whole book, I think, it's under 200 pages. So it wasn't that difficult to get through all of it. But really, it was just me getting tired of talking.
So now that the audiobook's out, what's kind of next for Scott? What's the next endeavor?
Right now I'm focusing on the podcast and trying to get that really boosted up to reach as many people as possible. I'm not. I'd love to at some point start making some income off of the podcast. That would be incredible if I could do that. But that's not even necessarily the goal. It's really just reaching as many people as possible.
Right.
The only reason why income would be good is because it will help me reach more people. All of the proceeds from the book so far, I've invested back into the podcast in terms of advertising, and I've upgraded some software that I use and stuff to edit the podcast and everything like that. But everything has gone back into the podcast, and I haven't taken any of the money personally, at least not yet, from the book sales. So, honestly, it's really just focusing on the podcast and trying to help out as many people as I can.
So before we go, I want to make sure you get a chance to, drop your lines, drop your tagline, tell everybody where they can find more about Scott and the Drive On podcast.
Yeah, so the Drive On podcast is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So wherever you're listening to this, you can pretty much find it. It's on YouTube, all the normal podcast places where you go. Just search for Drive On Podcast. And you can also go to driveonpodcast.com. You can listen to the episodes there or find out where to subscribe through there. There's quick links that you could find there. As far as the book goes, the book is available on Amazon. Search for Surviving Son, and you'll be able to find the paperback, hardcover, ebook, the Kindle, and the audiobook version all through Amazon. If anyone, this is another thing that kind of blew me away, is when I released a book, people were asking for signed copies, and I was like, who the hell wants a signed copy from me? Like, who am I? And but people do apparently want signed copies, and they like that. So survivingsonbook.com is where you can get a signed copy of the book. I'd be happy to do that for you and send it out to you. And then as far as the social media goes, again, you can find that all on driveonpodcast.com, but Drive On Podcast on pretty much all the major social media channels is where you can find me.
Awesome, man. Yeah, definitely go pick up the book, Surviving Son. Now you have the option to listen to it, to read it in all kinds of different formats. Definitely go pick it up and then tune into the Drive On Podcast. There's tons of great episodes out there, including one with me. But, awesome having you on. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate your time. And, of course, we'll do this again sometime. And I wish you the best of luck on the audiobook, because I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.